Hello everyone, good morning. If you guys can hear me okay, let's just do a quick sound check. I have a fan going behind me because it's a little bit warm today, but hopefully that's not coming through too strong. Let me know if it is and I'll go turn it down. So if you're here, just say hello. Hi Kathy. Welcome. So am I sounding okay? Can't hear the fan. Okay, good. It's behind me, so I didn't think the mic would pick it up, but just in case. It's supposed to be 103 degrees here today, so it's gonna be a little bit warm. All right, so we are in our final critique. Kind of hard to believe that we're already here. I know it's been a really intensive course and there's been a lot of work to do, but everyone's doing really great. And I know some of you had to go on vacation or you had other kind of things get in the way and you weren't able to finish for critique. So if you're watching this and you aren't participating today, just feel free to reach out to me. If you continue to work on your painting, just reach out to me by email. I'm more than happy to give you written feedback or through the forum. I'm going to keep the forum up probably until I offer my next course, just so that those of you who joined in late or you're kind of getting into the course material a little bit later, you'll still have a platform where you can reach out to me. For those of you who are continuing to work on your paintings even, again, you can reach out to me through the forum or by email. Either one is fine. Hi Susan, Beth, and Marianne. Glad you guys can make it. Is it hot in Florida, Beth? Kathy, I'm not sure what my next class is going to be. I have a few ideas. I kind of wanted to expand, kind of looking at what we were able to cover in this class, which was a lot of material. But, like anything, you can only go so in depth on a specific topic, especially when you're trying to do a portrait from start to finish. So a couple of things I've considered is possibly a course that focuses solely on mixing color for flesh tones, and we would go into, rather than doing a single portrait, maybe we would do more like portrait studies and attempt to paint a variety of flesh tones using a similar palette. That's one idea I've had. I'm still brainstorming a couple of ideas, but if you guys have feedback on something you would like to see or you feel is missing and that you would like to go more in depth on, please email me. I'm going to send out probably a survey sometime next week, or like a little questionnaire kind of thing, asking the same thing. So that way, when I do offer another one, it'll probably be late summer or early fall. I'm thinking probably August or September is when I'll offer the, or I'll make an announcement for the next class. So yeah, and then there's, of course, more in depth on drawing and that sort of thing as well. So if you guys have any ideas that you would like to see, just feel free to let me know and give me a shout out. I know, Beth, it is hard to believe this is our last critique. I mean, this is the longest online course I've taught. 10 weeks is quite an extensive amount of time. And so I wasn't quite sure how, when you're kind of planning things out, you're trying to pace it for other people too, not just for your, how long it takes me to do the painting, but how long everyone kind of collectively will need. And it's a long-term kind of commitment. 10 weeks is a long time, but I'm surprised at how fast it went by. It just kind of flew. And I'm sure a lot of you felt like, oh, I wish I had even more time, And I remember feeling that way as a student as well. I would take a 10-week course, and by the end of the class, I'm like, I wish I had like 4 more weeks with this model, because I just never felt like I had enough time to, really get the finish that I wanted. And part of that's just because you're learning, and that takes more time. That's interesting, Marianne, what you said. You haven't spent as many hours on one portrait. That's one of the benefits to taking like a structured course that is long term, is that it kind of forces you to be patient and work through a lot of the issues. I think when you're working on your own, the hardest part is being objective about your work. And also, you might feel like it's close to finished, or you're not quite happy with it, but you can't pinpoint what it is. And it's tempting to just kind of set it aside and move on. But sometimes just taking it that extra step further, you can really kind of prove to yourself what you can do, just by having that little extra push. All right, so does anyone have, let's just talk about questions. Does anyone have questions about the class overall? Anything that you felt, wasn't clear, or that you would like me to elaborate on a little bit? And Marianne, just so you know, like when you're first doing a painting through this process, it does take a long time. And you guys probably overall put more hours in to your painting than I did for the demo. Part of that, though, was I was trying to keep the demos as, succinct and short as possible, without, compromising quality or amount of information. But, as you continue to practice and you implement a process that is, kind of repeatable, and it becomes more familiar to you over time, it will become quicker. So you'll get through those first stages much faster. And I'd say the most challenging stage is always the first initial color block in. I mean, of course, there's the drawing and the underpainting, and the drawing is really, really important. But the first initial color mixing and the first color block in is probably the most challenging and work intensive part of the process. And that will get faster and faster. Especially if you practice like little studies, like tiling studies. That's something I did a lot. For every painting I did a small study, and we did ours 5x7, but you could do them a little bit larger if you want to get a little more specific. You could do like 8x10s and leave them tiled and just practice that block in process. And that can make you quicker at it when you go into your larger piece. So you asked if I would do a child portrait class, like a drawing portrait class, like talking about children's proportions and that sort of thing. That's actually a good idea. I haven't thought of that, but I'll write that down as a potential future course, because children's portraits present particular challenges, and though I'd say the hardest part is which age are we talking about, and so that would maybe be something I would do a survey of different ages, and talk about proportional differences between, because kids grow so quickly and their proportions change so rapidly in such a short amount of time that, the difference between an infant and a 2-year-old is just massive in terms of proportion. Okay, well, that's 3 to 9. That's interesting. Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind. Absolutely. Thank you for the suggestion. So, and then Beth, any suggestions on moving forward? I would say just try repeating the process. You guys are going to have lifetime access to the videos, so you can always come back to them anytime, and if you want to refresh your memory. Next month I'm going to give everyone a link to my Gumroad account, which is another kind of video platform account. It doesn't run as efficiently as the one we do our class on. It doesn't have like the live feed kind of interaction and stuff. So I don't do my courses on there usually, but I'm going to offer the videos for streaming indefinitely through there. So everyone's going to get a link for access for that next month. And you'll have access through the website until July 31st or 30th. 31st, I can't remember. But it's the last day in July. So you guys will be able to continue watching. And I would just recommend try repeating the process. You can take another photo angle from the model, or you can try shooting your own picture and repeating the painting, the underpainting, color mixing, first block in, color study, kind of repeat that on a new portrait. Now that you kind of know the process start to finish, you kind of know what the purpose is of each stage. That's always the trick when you're first doing a new process, something that's new to you, is you don't really know what's coming next entirely. You might have a general idea, but you don't know, what the purpose is. So, for example, when you're doing your first underpainting, you might have made yours too dark, for example, or too pale, or something to that effect. And now that you've been through the process, you kind of know the purpose of that underpainting, and kind of, or maybe you were too detailed when you first did your block in, and you realize, oh no, we do all that detailing later, so I can be a little more generic or general, and soft in my first pass. So those are kind of things that you'd start to implement as you repeat that process. And it just really comes down to mileage and practice. So continuing to build, kind of a practice around a similar process. And when you're learning, it's easy to, get involved in, several different processes for painting. You might be doing like an alla prima, and then you might be doing something more like what we're doing, which is an indirect. You could be doing, more of a grisaille and glaze approach like I did in the tonal portrait class. So, it kind of depends on what you like, but I would suggest starting to hone that and kind of start narrowing down, because a lot of you are fairly advanced. And, so you want to start to narrow down the type of process that speaks to you. A lot of my process is gleaned from several different teachers that I studied with, and I kind of broke it down and pulled the best from what I got out of everyone. I got something from every teacher I've ever studied with. And sometimes I pulled one part of their process, or maybe it was a color mixing, concept, or maybe it was drawing, underpainting, for example. But I kind of merged that into a process and started evolving that process over time. And I still kind of evolve a little bit. I'm still sometimes implementing. I might start my painting slightly different. But yeah, just starting to kind of hone that practice and repeating it, and it becomes more familiar, and it'll become much quicker too. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Kathy, let's start with you. And you had mentioned in your email that you weren't quite sure if you got the effect on the hair and that sort of thing. And you did try to implement some of the changes, like and a lot of the changes we had talked about last week was building contrast in the eyes and that sort of thing. And I feel like you do have that. It's looking really, really nice. So let's talk about maybe the hair. Let's start there, and then we'll kind of move around. You also said that you had implemented a sky behind your model, and you weren't sure if you wanted to paint it in or not. So we'll talk about that in just a minute as well. But as the painting is right now, I feel like the hair looks like 80% done, and just a few touches of highlights, like those little crisp, wispy hairs, is going to make the hair all that much better and more realistic. And so what I'm talking about are these really fine little wisps that you get. Oops, let me grab a pen here. So I'm talking about like you have these little fine kind of textures in here, and you do have some like kind of random wisps and that sort of thing. And I think if you did some of that more around the edge of the hair and added some of these, it's going to take your portrait to that next step. I think you have a good underpainting. I like the sectioning that you have here. And the breakup and the soft and lost edges that you have along the bangs looks great. I don't feel like anything feels too solid necessarily. So what I would suggest is maybe taking a really fine pointed brush, kind of like the long, if you have the long filbert, rosemary, those work great. If not, you can always get like a rigger, what's called a rigger brush, and it's like a really long pointed round. You can also go and just buy a really cheap synthetic round that has a really long fine point. The nice thing about having the longer hair is that it flexes a little bit more, and it's just really nice for making long strokes. For example, like hair. If you have a shorter kind of small round, you're just going to be able to create, it's only going to hold enough paint for like a short, small stroke. Sometimes even watercolor brushes that are like a natural hair, like a squirrel hair, that have that rigger shape, or like the long, extra long pointed round, those can work nicely. You just can't go back and use them for watercolor again, but you can use something like that. So like, I don't know if those of you who aren't familiar with like a rigger, here's the ferrule, and they kind of look like this. They're really long, kind of fine points. You can even go with one that's a little bit shorter, so long as it comes down to a nice, fine point like that. There's a couple of brands, like generic brands like Winsor Newton, or I'm forgetting a couple of the names, but you can find some of the synthetic. They're even made for acrylics, and they will work just fine for oil, and they'll help you get some of those little wispy hairs. But what they'll be nice for is when you go into an area like this. Let me pick up a little bit of that highlight color. You can see she has kind of like this buttery color. It's almost the color you have here in the background. And you would just want to go in. Let's see if I can get this brush to do it. Not quite. Let me see if I can find something else that has a little more of a painterly feel. Yeah, maybe something like that. Obviously, you'd want these top ends to be kind of faded, but if you went in and just added a few concentrated, and remember when you're putting these in too, like they will kind of have concentrated areas where the highlights kind of overlap. You might even have a value that's maybe a little bit less bright, but it's a little lighter than what you have. The best way to paint hair, is, even if someone has really light hair, is dark to light. So start with the darker tone. So it's fine that your values are where they are for the hair. I would just look at where you can build, a couple of those little wisps. Maybe even look at where they come and break up some of the edges of the hair. And then as you get into here, maybe you go in with like a darker color, but that's slightly lighter than what you have, and you can indicate a little bit. It's better to leave the shadows, a little more simplistic. So I think if you just went in and added some of that, it's going to build some of that texture. And then taking maybe the shade that you have for the hair, but a little bit lighter, just like a value bit lighter, because you have a light background. So maybe like this color in here, and you can use this to create some of those wisps. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll put in the little wisps with my brush, but then I'll take a big soft brush and kind of blur them, or smudge them just a little bit so they don't feel like these razor sharp lines. So yeah, just working on breaking up some of those edges around the hair. I think we had talked a little bit about this last time. And if you feel like your lines are going down too dark, kind of like that one, you can just go lighter with the value, and then it won't have as much contrast with the background. You can even take one step darker than the background color and use that, since she's kind of blonde. You can use that to help you break up some of those edges. Back in here, she does have those nice intense coppery highlights, and I think if you just went in and just added, because the hair is kind of bound, you're not going to have as much break in like the shape. So the little highlights are going to be kind of more of a concentrated pattern, but you might try breaking some of that up as well. And don't be afraid to kind of break some of the edges of the bun as well. So you can kind of see where these colors concentrate. Now they're not going to have as much detail. They will be a slightly softer than what you have in the bangs because it's a little more out of focus. So you could use a little bit more of a broad stroke. And soften it a little bit. And just think about the direction. I can see that you have some of it. Maybe you just need to pop the contrast a little bit. Like in here, maybe adding just a few areas where there's a little bit of shimmer to the hair. Like I said, these little wisps can help as well. Just building. You don't have to put too many. Just a few will make a difference. I like to look at kind of how they cluster, and what can help. Like this is looking a little sharp and dark, but what can help is to make sure you oil out your background, or if you're going to put in the sky first and then add these little wisps after. Now looking at the face, let's bring up the close-up. And the color, the color look pretty accurate on this one? I know on the other one it looked really close to the image, but just let me know if this looks a little saturated or orange. It might be just a touch. Sometimes, the close-ups will emphasize certain colors. So I'm going to just look here. In the eyes and in the details of the features. Eyebrow looks much better up here where you had softened it. Right through here, that looks great. And I like the little wisps of hairs that you have there at the top. The little accents here, those worked out really nice. And it looks like you even put one there and maybe here. If you're going to go in with your background, I would just clean up the shape here, the edge. It's a little hard to see what is defined as the rim of her edge. It's mostly that this line kind of deviates. It gets a little muddy through there. So I would just clean up that shape and maybe make sure you bring it all the way up to the edge. And whenever I'm painting the background and I'm going in towards the skin tones, you can oil out this area, but sometimes what helps is to take this matching skin tone right here and just do a very thin line, a very thin tile just along the edge. So that way when you bring in your blue and you bring it up next to it, you have another color to actually blend it into it. it looks a little more orange close up. Yeah, well, I think your colors look pretty good. So nothing is jumping out to me as far as the colors go, because you have these really beautiful violets, you know, in the eyes. Um, I could take out a little bit of the yellow, emphasize some of the blue, just a touch. Oh wait, I think I did that on the wrong layer. Yeah, but no, I think your colors are actually looking great. Um, so that would be my suggestion, is just when you come, if you're going to repaint this background. If you're not, then just all you have to do is take this color and maybe mix up a little bit of this color and just make a couple of corrections. I can do it in paint here. So maybe, for example, taking this skin tone and just cleaning up that shape. Maybe even through here, you might consider pulling that out, that skin tone out, and then taking a little bit of the background color just for softening the edge and clean up where they meet. It's a pretty minor difference, but it'll make a big impact. I'm going to redo that because I didn't do it on a separate layer. All right, so I would just take maybe a little bit of this deeper peach skin tone, and then as you get down here, a little bit lighter, and then take your background color and whatever you're going to do. If it's the blue, that's fine. If it's this white color, you're going to leave it, and that's fine as well, and just soften the edge. I'm just going to cover that up real quick. I think your edge along the jawline is fine, so try not to change that too much when you go in with your background. The nose ring looks great. I like the little succinct highlights that you have on there. There's only one thing, and it's in this eye here, that's throwing me off a little bit. And when you're kind of zoomed out, you can kind of see it. She has this shape kind of through, it's like right through this section, where her eye almost feels like it mimics like this kind of pointed shape, like that, right? And yours is feeling just a little more flat right through here. So let me try and figure out what it is that we need to change. It's going to be a very minor tweak. Because I realize her eyeliner starts to go down before then. I'm wondering if it's that we need to take a little bit of this color hold on, let me just kind of arrange these there. So I'm wondering if it's that we take this color and push this down. Let's see if that made a difference. Maybe go a little higher here. I'm just playing with this real quick to see what I think the change is, because I do see what you were seeing where it flattens out right here, but maybe it needs to be a little bit more nuanced. Okay, so what I'm thinking is that maybe instead of having such a light color right in here coming all the way down to the edge, you just take this darker mauve tone that you have here and just tile it and kind of blend it into that into the eyeliner here. Let's see if that did it. And there might be a slight, I'm wondering if this got too rounded here. Let me do that in black. Like this. Oops. Where the crease is kind of like that, and hers is a little more sharp. And see how it pinches off at this corner? So I think where you have it starting is fine. But maybe you need to take this and bring it down a little more sharp in this outer corner. It's a little tweak. You can see how that kind of imitates her little almond shape. And don't be afraid to take this really deep red accent to this corner. You could probably emphasize it. See how it gets kind of orangey right in there? It's kind of nice. It's a dark orange. Maybe I should go a little darker. Just a little accent there. Let the line break through this middle part, and then have it pick up right through this darkest section here, and just change that slant a little bit. Yeah, so you don't really even need to change where you have her eyeliner. I think it's just a matter of putting that shape a little bit more angular, and then it'll mimic her left side, because right now you have the correct shape here on the left. I think that'll make a big difference. And then you'll probably end up wanting to go back in with a couple of those dark eyelashes like you have on the left. You did a nice job on them because she is wearing kind of a more prominent, like her lashes are kind of clumped together more from her mascara. So, you know, going in and adding a few more of those after you've made that correction to the shape. I'm going to just erase those so that you don't have that interfering. Same thing with cleaning up the shape here on the left ear. I would say just look at this shape here. It's really minor. These are really, really minor changes. But since your painting is so close to being there, so I would just say maybe fill that in a little bit right through here. Round this out. And then just make sure you have a nice clean edge there that's somewhat soft. You might end up trimming that just a little bit too. The jawline here looks great. And that's pretty much my only suggestions. So cleaning up the ears and tweaking that eye. And that is that is pretty much it. The teeth look good. Eyes look good. You might find yourself wanting to add a few of these tiny little accents. Once it's dry, oil out this area and just add sometimes these little touches can make a difference. Looks like you have it on this inner corner. You can maybe add a speck here and just intensify that one in the lower half. Nose highlight looks good. She has a very slight little highlight there. It looks like you have one right here, but maybe a little. That's optional. It's really minor. And that's pretty much it. Do you have any questions on that part before we talk about your background? Okay, perfect. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your background here. Okay, so you're kind of on the fence about whether or not to do the blue sky. I think it looks nice as it is, and it would look nice with the blue too. My only suggestion is that in your color study, you might have gone a little bit too dark or saturated with your blue. So I would suggest moving it more towards a gray and making sure that you keep the shapes very, very soft. So let me do a little paint over here on top of your color study. So let's just compare really quickly the colors that you have in your color study and the ones that are in the sky. So here's the sample from the darkest blue in the sky right there. And then here's the value of your darkest blue somewhere around here. Let's see, I'll grab from here. Okay, so there's a value difference and there's also a chroma or intensity difference. So my suggestion would just be to maybe go over these darker blue areas with a scumble of a lighter blue gray. So my suggestion for making it a little more gray is to add a touch of the complement. Basically, you can add like an orangey kind of color. Now you don't want it to go too dull. So sometimes I like to take like like if you took ultramarine blue and added a very, very small amount of cad red light, or you could even use like a transparent oxide red. Like I'm talking a very small amount, just enough to kind of gray it out, and then add more white to it to make it lighter. And then just use that almost as a scumble over these areas where you have it too dark. To soften them out. And then your light should have a little bit of a slightly warmer color. You'll notice that the white here I'll do a sample, a little color sample here. There's the lightest part of the sky. Let's compare that to the darkest one. And then let's do your lightest part here to the, well, we already compared the darkest one. I think I've already covered it up, but it was more like that. So I think your values are just a little dark. And also this, see how it takes on a little bit of a coolness? You might want to add a touch of yellow to the white for those lighter areas. And it's very similar to the color you already have. And since you're using a lighter blue sky, I would just keep it softer and maybe even less contrasted than what I used in mine. Since you're already painting a model with a light background, you want to keep it as close to that original as possible, because the light, if it influences, you know, her background in the original influences the way you see her skin tones, because it bounces into the shadows, and you know, there's this overall kind of cooler light in the background. And so just keep that in mind if you do decide to add, you know, something inventive like a sky, which can look really nice. You don't have to make it a real literal sky either. You could just have it be, you know, a softer kind of shape. Maybe just have it more interesting than just a simple plain white background where there's some variation, but maybe it doesn't have to be as literally, you know, rendered as a sky. But it might, you know, give the impression of a sky, if that makes sense. So that would be the difference there. You know, lighter, a little bit softer. Make sure you're using blending. I realize that on your color study you probably didn't blend very much. That's fine, but just keep that in mind. And I think even if you wanted to go, you know, darker in some areas, I think that was the dark, like have it more blue in the upper half and then have it fade to a more lighter color. Just remember to keep it really soft and the contrast played down just a bit. Okay, do you have any questions? Beautiful painting, you did a fantastic job. Yeah, I don't really have any other suggestions. I think your painting is pretty much there. It's just a matter of deciding if you want to leave the background as it is, which it works as a portrait just fine. Let me find where that was. But you can see that her background does have a little bit more of a blue cast to it. So maybe doing a little bit of that suggestion of the sky could help. Change like her shirt top? Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to, I would do it on your color study first. What color were you wanting to change it to? Like if you don't want it to match like a blue sky, you know, I'm thinking in my painting I might go back in at some point, and I think I'm going to emphasize maybe more of a yellow rather than a turquoise into the shirt. Not like a yellow shirt, but make it a little bit more green to separate it from the background just a tiny bit. I'm kind of sitting with the portrait for a few weeks before I decide to do that or not. But what color were you thinking you'd like to change it? More grade with even strips or stripes. Okay. Okay, so let's try something. Let's just try it on the color study. So, like if we have the blue that you have right now is right about there. So if we kept at the same value but just went a little bit more gray, because her shirt is actually a little bit more gray than what you have in your color study. I would just experiment on the color study first. I do like that this side is a little bit darker. I don't know what kind of stripes you were thinking, but if you wanted, just make sure if you're inventing, pay attention to the wrinkles in the shirt. So, for example, let me first put in a couple of those folds. Just make sure if you're going to be putting in stripes, let's do lighter stripes just for the sake of it. Just remember that the stripes, if they're going to be going down or across the form, they're going to kind of follow the form. So that's going to be the tricky part, is to make sure that they follow the ripple of the form. Inventing is really tough, so if you can find a reference of a shirt, like what you want to use, or photograph a reference of a shirt that you want to use and put it under kind of a similar light direction, then you can implement it. And I've done that. I've taken a mannequin. I have a mannequin in my studio, and I'll put fabric or clothes on the mannequin, and use that to help me kind of create, invented clothing. And just remember your shadows on the stripes are going to get, darker. That's just a general idea. I don't know exactly what you were wanting, but just keep that in mind. And I would do whatever you're thinking on your color study first, and experiment on the color study before you try and do it on your larger painting. Less pressure that way. Work out the drawing issues, like with the stripes or whatever. Work out the pattern on the color study, or even if it feels too small to do that, you might try doing a slightly larger study. Just spend one day on another color study, and maybe do an 8x10, or it doesn't have to be even full 8x10, but something a little larger, and then experiment with the clothes and the background on that new color study. It's never too late to do something like that before you go into your finished portrait and do it on there. Yeah, just play with it. Think about colors, and if you can, get a striped shirt reference with the similar directional light. It doesn't have to be the same color light exactly. You want it kind of ballpark, but you definitely want the same direction. So you'll want something coming in from the left or the right side. All right, really nice work. If you have any follow-up questions, or you continue to work on it and you want my feedback, just post in the forum, or you can send me an email or anything like that. Okay? And I'll send you a couple of these layers. Like, I'll send you the color study one, and then, however these groupings are. And I'll probably do what I did last time, where I'll send you just the painted over sections as well, just so you can kind of have an idea. Okay? You're very, very welcome. Thank you for signing up for the class, and I really look forward to working with you some other time. All right. So, Angela, are you here? I just wanted to ask you a couple questions, because you had sent me a couple of different photos. These are the ones that you had taken outdoors. And I just wanted to see if this one looked a little too saturated, or if it looks really close. Feels just a touch saturated to me. So just let me know how that's looking to you. All right, let me get some layers here. And if you have any questions specifically, just type them in the chat box there and I'll address them. So let's start kind of with the general. It's pretty close. Okay, good. So I'll go based for anything specific to the portrait itself. I'll do it on this layer. But let's talk a little bit about your overall painting. My suggestion would be to make sure you go in and soften out some of the background a little bit more. It feels it's starting to pull my eye in a few areas, here and a little bit here. You want to watch having really strong shapes like that. It's a really tricky kind of thing doing the sky. It looks deceptively simple, but it's actually, getting the edges perfect and the way you want them is a little complex. It takes some practice, just like anything else. And one of the things that I tend to do is I usually go into my background sky 2 or 3 layers, same as the face. So, and even though I didn't do that in the demo, I kind of revisited more like wet into wet. You can always come back into this and build softer transitions in some of these areas, or you can kind of scumble over some of these areas and knock some of that texture back. So I'll do a little demo for you on that on top of this. The only other thing I would say is that maybe the blue got a little strong, and I feel like sometimes, like some of her skin tones do pick up some of this background. So we don't want to go too far from it. And I realized on mine I added a lot of blue, but I made sure I put in some of that purple too. So you might consider in a second layer, maybe even using this purple color to help you with, let's try that brush. Let's see if that one works better. To help you transition and even lighten a couple of areas. So for example, like in here, maybe going in and incorporating a little bit of that same purple color into the sky to soften out some of the effects of the blue. You'll probably want to have some of the blue on hand as well, so that you can go in and kind of scumble in some of that. You want to avoid really sudden dark spots in a sky. So you wanted it purple, but the base layer was purple, so when you put the clouds in, it became blue. That's okay. So I would just let this layer dry on the sky and then go back in and incorporate the purple again. It'll be really easy to do. And it's probably that maybe your purple was too, I can see it kind of in here, but maybe it was too blue of a purple and you didn't realize until you put it in. So you want to make sure, maybe use a little cadmium red into the mixture to incorporate some of that. And it doesn't mean you have to cover all the blue. Some of the blue is really nice. I would just say go in and scumble over some of these areas, add a little more variety to the color, soften areas back, maybe even like that purple, incorporate a darker version of that purple up in this corner. This area is a little bit sunken, or sorry, glary, so I can't quite tell the colors there, but I would just repeat what you see me doing on the left side. You're going to repeat the soft effect on the right side. And then you can take your lighter blue grays or your teal colors and you can go in and kind of scumble back into that and just create some softer shapes. I think softer shapes is what's going to help kind of bring the focus back to the portrait. You can see the difference between having stronger, higher contrast texture to having something a little bit more soft. It brings that focal point back to the portrait where it should be. We want the environment to support the subject. And, if we had her zoomed out a little bit and more of an environment painted around her, it wasn't just head and shoulder, then, you might end up with wanting more, maybe a little more detail with the sky or something. But, you know, we're trying to balance the composition. So, and same thing with this down here. Try just making sure you don't have that hard line there. It's suggesting almost like a hillside. I would darken it a little bit, maybe incorporate some of the blue and maybe even a touch of that purple. Just break it up a little bit so it feels more incorporated. You could put in a horizon line if you wanted, you know, something like that, but I don't think it needs it. I would just say break it up a little bit. And I'm talking about from my own experience too with my painting, you know, incorporating just more of that violet too is going to help keep her separate in terms of her shirt from feeling too similar to the background. Okay, so that's my suggestion for the overall portrait. With the shirt, I would say go in and simplify some of the texture, maybe with some glazes down in this bottom half. Just smooth over some of that dark. And maybe make sure you don't have this hard line right through here. And sometimes just a glaze can do that. Maybe have it just slowly fade to dark. I'm going to probably end up revisiting my painting as well in this area and keep tweaking it. Like I said, it's sometimes I sit with my paintings for a little while before I, you know, call them finished, and I feel it out and see what I feel it needs. You know, certain things will bother me, but I'm not quite sure if it's just that I've been staring at it too long. But you can see how that's starting to bring that focal point back to that portrait. Okay, so those are my suggestions for that layer. So let's look at the face. In a little bit more detail. You have some really beautiful colors here, and like you have that pink and the yellows and the blues. I would say just for a few, like a few touches, like here, that highlight in the eye, I think you could push it just a little bit more intense. Especially just even if it's just one spot, like right where it overlaps. Brighten it up a touch. Doesn't even have to be the whole shape because that can look a little too intense, but maybe just one little spot on that shape. This highlight could probably be a little bit smaller. And look here in this little section how we have kind of a lost edge happening right in here. You darkened this really nicely, but I think if we go out here with some of that same dark color and just kind of transition this tear duct area so that it doesn't have such a hard defined edge, and then you can go in with your highlights, maybe a little highlight in here and around this form. I think the right tear duct looks great. Again, just maybe go in and find where you can add a little sparkle, specular highlight. Adds that kind of glimmer to the eye. She has this one out here, but I would leave it kind of secondary to the other one. You could maybe brighten it up a touch, but yeah, the whites of her eyes might be a little dark around it too. Just maybe go in and scumble just a tiny bit, just right in that middle section on both of those eyes. And if you want this right side to stand out a little bit more, take the same color that you used on the left and just emphasize that a touch more on the right. I can't tell if it's just that with the glare I can't see it, but if you need to, darken that pupil as well. And that's going to get her eyes to pop a little bit more. I want you to watch the edge right here along the brow where it meets the highlight. It feels a little bit sharp. So just take a really tiny brush and just scumble over that edge just to give it a slight softness. It's very subtle difference. Beautiful highlights on the nose and the lips. This line here feels maybe a little solid all the way across, like one continuous line. I always like to break up my lines a little bit, find one spot where you make it maybe a little bit lighter or more red. So maybe I'm thinking through right through here. Take some of this color and just lightly scumble it over right through here. Leave it in the middle, just maybe soften it there. And maybe on the right side of this here. Just so we have that lost found edge happening. It makes things a little bit more convincing. The hair texture looks beautiful. You could go in with a little bit of that lighter color. I even used a little bit more of a golden color on her and mine, and just hit a few areas just on this little section like you saw me do, just to get it to pop a little bit more, just for those tiny highlights. But let me do it with a smaller brush. So just finding one or two strands where you want to emphasize that shimmer, because the light hits so strong in the face that we want to make sure we have that extra little pop to the highlights there. That might be a touch bright. But just a little bit, and that's going to get it to stand out a little bit more. And down here in the neck, it's nice that you have that tiling there, but just make sure that that second tile doesn't have a hard edge. So go in and just, sometimes it just takes like scumbling the lighter color slightly over the other one to create a softer edge. And most often what we're doing in these last stages are tweaking edges and that sort of thing. So make sure, like when you come in here with the hair, that you have maybe a softer edge there. I'm just looking around at different areas. And that's pretty much what I see. Do you have any questions? Or any other areas you'd like me to address? Maybe smooth out this little top half here where it meets the hair, so it's not as splotchy up there. It's a subtle thing. Her right eye looks a little wide. You're talking about this eye here, right? It does slightly. It could be a little combination of both eyes as they kind of work together. So the way I see it here is I see the corner of her eye here and here, and corner of her eye here and here. And there is a length difference there. I think part of it is that the right eye actually needs to open up a little bit. This eye here, just a slight amount. And maybe this one needs to close a little sooner. And use maybe a dark color on this outer edge. It might mean you need to define that the lashes come up a little sooner. We do see a touch of her in her lid here. Yeah, that helped to shorten it. I think it'll even out this side too. If you take that over a little wider. Just a slight amount. I think that's going to help to balance both eyes. Okay. You could probably make like this little highlight a little bit smaller. And get like a lighter pink that's maybe not as contrasted here towards the outer rim. That way the lip kind of transitions a little more softly there. Maybe watch putting such a light value right here. Maybe it should be just a little bit darker. I realize she has a tiny bit of light peeking over there, but it's a little more in a shadowy kind of range. What will help it feel lighter is to emphasize a little more of the dark right in here. And underneath the lip. Obviously not that dark. Let me go in with a slightly different color. Has more of a burgundy feel to it. That's going to help turn that lip a little bit too. Okay. So I think that combined with making the background a little more nuanced, like we did in this, those things are going to help kind of bring the portrait to a finish. And I suggest just kind of living with the painting for a little while before you commit to varnishing it. I will have that varnishing video probably mid-July. It depends on when I get in and I'm able to finish the finishing touches on my portrait. I'm pretty picky. I take a long time staring at my work before I finally call it finished. Sometimes I know the painting's finished, but there's some things I want to kind of tweak on mine, so I'll be playing with it. But I will have a varnishing video for you guys later on in July, and that will help to bring, it'll give you guys some time to work on your paintings and incorporate some of these changes. And if you do want follow-up, like feedback, if you work on this and in a few weeks you want some follow-up feedback, just send me an email and or post in the forum and I can point out a few things. I'm happy to do that. I will be out of town coming up, but I'll have my phone, so it might be easier if you try and do it by the forum or email. Probably the email is a little easier for me to do on my phone. So, but I'll be gone until July 5th, starting next weekend. So just keep that in mind. If you don't hear from me for a few days, it's because I'm going to be dealing with some family stuff. Okie dokie. So really beautiful job on the painting. I think you did really nice work with your skin tones. Moving forward, I would just concentrate on, really nailing the drawing. When you're, and I realize things get lost as you kind of continue with your painting. So that first block in, you can risk losing your drawing. But just concentrate on making sure proportions. It really does pay off to take that time in the beginning, as some of you have found out over the course of the painting. Things do shift, but sometimes drawing errors pop up. So I know we had a timeline we were trying to stick to for the class, but try repeating this process again and take as much time as you need through each stage, and especially in that beginning stage when you're doing the drawing, because it's much harder to make those drawing changes later on in the paint stage than it is early on. You're very, very welcome. Beautiful work, and thank you for joining class. Oops, I didn't mean to close all of those out. So I'll send you the paint overs for both the background and the face. All right, Beth. I think I saw you in here. I think everyone's in here today. So, Beth, I had to lighten your pictures just a touch, but I just wanted to get your feedback on if the color looks good to you, if it looks too saturated or anything like that. Just let me know. I'm going to use this one, the close-up. There you are. Hello. So I'm going to use this one for talking about the features and that sort of thing. But I did want to ask with this one if the background was too dark. The shirt looks too blue. Let's try taking out some of that blue. Maybe I'll do it for the shadows. Take out some of the blue. The background is a little dark. I had that feeling, so I just wanted to see. How's that? Does that look a little better? Now don't worry about the skin tones because I'll be using this one to refer to the skin tones. And when we get to that, we'll talk a little bit about that. So yeah, so overall, I think this looks fantastic. You have a really nice, solid portrait. Background looks good. So if you're not going to make it, you know, anything other than what it is in the photo, I think this is nice. It's nice and smooth. You have a nice gradient from dark to light. Let me grab my pen here. So I like that you have that slight gradient and that you have this a slightly lighter value than the hair. That helps to get her to pop forward. Your edges around the figure and the hair look pretty good. This is a little sharp right along here. And I realize with such high contrast, it's hard to get those to blend. What I would suggest is maybe taking some of this color, the darker purple, and doing a gradient up this way. So that way it goes from being like maybe a dark purple here, and then it ends up being around this value towards the face. That's going to help pull our eye up and in to the portrait and not down here where that really high contrast edge is. So that would be my main suggestion for the background. Everything else looks good. The shirt looks good. Your detail in the shirt looks perfect. If you wanted to, you could push it a little bit more greenish, but that could just be the photo coming across that way. I would take a little bit of this color and maybe apply a little bit to the chest in this area. Just because, and I realize in the photo, I don't have one that's zoomed out, but it does get a little bit lighter here. It's maybe not quite as bright, but I feel like this area is feeling kind of flat. And so to get that dimension, I would just apply a little bit of that light there. And I'll do that as a paint over here really quickly for you so you can see what I mean. Not a huge difference, but maybe just a touch. And you can simplify since it's so close to the bottom, you know, kind of that breast shape for the shirt. Maybe play down some of these wrinkles. But you can see how that kind of sculpted the form a little bit more. And that's pretty much my only suggestion for the shirt. Okay, so with regards to the hair, I think your colors look great. I would suggest maybe taking some of these light colors and incorporate some along the edge here. Mostly because your background is so dark that I think it'd be really nice to have a slightly found edge right through the bottom there. And you can enhance a couple of the highlights. Through that area, and then let it fall off back to dark towards the bottom here. And maybe take some of this nice kind of copper color and do the same thing here. I can't tell if it's just sunk in, so you might oil that area out. But maybe having a little bit, of the light trickle down just because of the value of your background, and have a found edge. So you kind of get, what you're doing is basically creating, you know, a found edge through here, a lost edge here, kind of a lost edge through here, and a found edge here, and then a lost edge. So it's creating a little more dynamic quality for the flow of the hair. So that would be my suggestion there. So let's see what that looked like without and then with. So just a little enhancement, and that will help balance that out. Welcome, Diane. Thanks for tuning in. All right, so the other highlights in the hair look good. You might consider doing something similar over here, especially on the side where it meets the shirt, like right in here, maybe a little lighter, just on the tips of her hair, and get that to pop forward. And that's pretty much it for the hair. I think that looks great. Do you have any questions on that part? So we have just the hair and the shirt, a little bit of tweaking on that. So let's move into the portrait a little bit closer. Okay, and so with the portrait, let's talk a little bit first about the color and the value. Does everything look pretty good? Oh, don't worry, I didn't misread what you wrote. Okay, so just let me know if this looks pretty good for your painting, if the colors feel pretty accurate, or if it needs a little tweaking before we get started. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, wait, okay. Okay, that looks good? Okay, perfect. I had a feeling it looked pretty accurate, so so I'm just going to kind of take a survey here of edges, color, detail, some of those things. Often what I'm doing when I'm looking for edges, it's a little washed out. Okay, so let me try and adjust that first. Let me try bringing down some of the midtones. And I could bump the saturation a touch. That helped. I think I can see now areas where you had more yellow, more pink. Does that look a little better? Okay, so you zoom in on this one too. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what I'm doing when I'm looking at your paintings is kind of squinting not quite squinting my eyes, but letting my eyes kind of soften the gaze. And I'm looking for where edges jump where they shouldn't. For example, like I'm looking at the reference and I'm looking over at your painting and I can see just a few areas where maybe things are standing out a little too much. So, for example, the first area would probably be right in here. Let me do that with white so it's a little easier to see. So right in there. This transition between these two values is just creating too hard of a line, and you don't tend to see that in the painting over here, and the same goes for this one. So those are the things that we're going to work on tweaking just a little bit. And oftentimes all it takes is finding a value that's somewhere in between. So you might start with, for example, and it depends on what color kind of needs to pull down or pull up. So what I would do is take maybe the pink color, but you're going to lighten the value and find something in between to use in that area. And you're just going to use that like a very thin scumble, and you'll probably pull it down into the dark a little bit and up into that light a little bit. And if it's too pink, you might try taking a little bit of blue to it, or even mixing some of this color from up here, taking some of that color and pulling it back down, just to create that softer turn to the form. Same goes on this side. I would find maybe a color that falls somewhere between and just scumble and glaze the transition between the two. It could be that this is also a little bit light. We definitely have that highlight on the left side, but on the right side it's a little bit more of a pink color. It's almost the color you have right here in the forehead, right here. So use that there instead. And that should do it for that area. You can see the difference that makes with the softening the eyes. Hi Randy, welcome. Okay, so looking through other areas, like this outline along the edge of the nose, right along here, is just a little solid. Now we do see it pick up in the picture right here, and then it gets kind of a lost edge right across this area right here. So that's what we want to do, is take, you know, maybe the skin tone, not the highlight color, but something in between. I would say maybe a soft light pink. And you're just going to scumble over that edge. Might even need to take the adjacent color and pull it up into that. So it creates a softer, slightly more lost edge. You can have that edge a little more found right through the section right here like you did. So you can see how that helps to bring a little more volume to the tip of the nose. Hard edges and really razor sharp edges always tend to flatten things. So they're appropriate in certain areas, but if you have them in the wrong areas, it tends to kind of stop us in our tracks and kind of flatten things out. Another sharp edge is right in here. All you need to do is take a really small tile of like a pink that's somewhere in between value-wise and just lightly scumble over it. Or tile around it, and you can see that all automatically softened. So a lot of times when edges are kind of created and we didn't realize it, it's because there's also a huge value jump between the two and you didn't have enough room for blending the two values. So sometimes it just means you need to go in and find a value that's in between and kind of lightly scumble it in or tile it in. I would play down this highlight right here just a little bit. The one that should stand out the most is the one on the tip of the nose. I realize that she has a highlight down here, but I would just play it down a little bit because it's next to such a dark area that it pulls the eye. And just remember to keep the edges where it sits very soft. And if you look at this image here and you compare that highlight to like the highlights you see on the lips, those specular highlights, or the one on the nose, or especially the one in the eye, you'll notice that it's actually quite diffused. It doesn't mean you can't have it like maybe slightly lighter. Just make sure that the edge is nice and soft. And you might sharpen up your highlight right there on the tip of the nose. If you can, go just a touch brighter. Maybe even taking just like a slight pink color. And then same thing, just actually the left highlight is good on the left eye. Maybe just beef up that one on the right eye. Make it just a little bit sharper and brighter. This one is just a little sharp. It might be a touch bright, but it's probably just a matter of taking that gray that you have next to it and just kind of fanning that out a little bit and making sure you have a softer edge where that comes up to the corner of the mouth. See how it's still bright, but it's not grabbing my attention as much because the edge is a little bit softer. And even this corner of the mouth edge, you can see it has a level of softness there where that form rolls in. So just find a mid-tone and just do a thin tile right there. And maybe even tile it around this edge here and blend it out. And a little bit here at the top. And when I'm talking about adding the paint for those areas, it's a very, very small amount of paint that you're using on your brush. So you might even dip your paint or your brush in the paint, but then kind of slightly dab it off or wipe it off on a rag, and then you're just going to go in and tweak those areas. And make sure you oil out before you touch up these areas, and that'll help you keep control over those edges. Okay, so those are my main suggestions. Those are the only things that really jumped out to me. Do you have any questions or any other areas that you're struggling with that you would like me to talk about? This area here, while I'm waiting for your answer, might be a little bit dark. You might take like a slightly lighter color than the one you have right here. You just take that color and add a little bit of white and do a very, very, very light scumble just over where it transitions, like right in here, and then have it fade off. It's subtle, but I think it will help. I might have made it too light. Here, let's try that again. Just where it transitions to the cheek, not all the way down to the jawline, but maybe something like that. And when you're making broad changes like that, sometimes it helps to use a larger brush Just keep that in mind. Oh, thank you, Beth. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, this is really beautiful. I think just, keep focusing on some of those edges, and you can see those areas that I painted over. They're just really minor tweaks. Um, yeah, just be mindful of your edges, and keep practicing the process. It will get easier, and if you have any follow-up questions or you continue working on this and you want me to take a final look, feel free to email it to me, okay? Thank you for joining the class. I hope to work with you again. All right, Kelly. I don't know if you're in here or if you're live, but if you are, say hello. And I did have a question about your painting if you are here. Mostly the color. I just want to make sure before I go over this that the color looks how it feels to you in real life. There's a bit of glare, I realize, too, but don't worry about that too much. Canvas has a tendency to have a little bit more glare. That's one of the reasons I work on panel, is the texture weave of canvas kind of destroyed the illusion that I was always trying to create. And also, if you have a tendency to, or you're drawn to more, that high contrast work, you might consider switching to working on a smoother surface like a panel as opposed to like a canvas or a linen. Though you can buy like quadruple primed linen that's like pretty smooth. I still recommend testing out panel and just giving it a shot. It's a little slippery. It can be a little tricky to get used to, but you will create a little more depth in your paintings because you don't have this kind of glitter effect that's happening right in here. It made a huge difference in my work. I used to work on canvas. Let me pull this up here. So like you can see like in these areas where it's really dark, but it looks kind of gray because of that texture created by the canvas. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so another thing about working on canvas is the edges are harder to get real razor sharp unless you paint really, really thick, because they tend to kind of skip over the texture, and that's great for when you want to create a soft edge like in these areas. But when you want to create a nice sharp edge, it can be a little harder to manipulate, especially when you get into really tight areas like the eyes. My suggestion, I think, is to maybe emphasize the warmth of this underplane to the eye here. Don't be afraid to go in with like a nice rich kind of burgundy. It does get quite dark on this side, but it still has a warmth to it. And I think that will help to separate some of that underplane of the eye from the whites of the eye. And the same goes for some of the areas where you might want to push the crease and the value of that shadow. I think you have a good value here. It's just a little hard to see where it connects over this way. So you might try pulling that in and maybe go a little warmer in your shadow here, especially in these underplanes to the eyes. These are a great area to pay attention to. Whenever you have shadows in the underplanes of the eyes, it usually is pretty warm because there is reflected light hitting this area and bouncing into that little shadow. So you're going to get a little bit more warmth or redness to it. Another plane to pay attention to where it does that is here in the nose. And I think you could probably make your shadow just a little bit more obvious for this shadow side here. where you have this underplane. If you make it a little bit warmer and a little darker, it'll help to separate it. And you might find yourself needing to take maybe like an alizarin red and go in and maybe even darker than that and darken that nostril a little bit. It's a little brown, and I think if you go more pink or red, and don't be afraid to push that cadmium kind of red reflection as it warms up towards the outer edge, that's going to help add more life. Whenever you have any kind of holes in the face or body and you put them with like a cooler brown, it's going to look dead. So it's always better to emphasize the warmth in those areas. Same thing anywhere where there's a lot of blood vessels like the tear ducts. Don't be afraid to push the chroma in those areas just a little bit more. It's going to add life to the color and help differentiate those areas from kind of the broader skin tones. On the mouth, there's just a slight drawing correction to make. I think this kind of comes up too high. And it could also be just a little bit darker. So I think I would push this maybe a little more straight right through there. And don't be afraid to kind of emphasize this little dark corner, that smile line. Her lips also end just before, so maybe curve that down a little bit. On this side, I would take your pink and just bring it up and define where that edge is a little more clearly. And again, take that same color and add a few areas where you want to. You don't have to have a solid line all the way across. In fact, I don't recommend having it the same value all the way across, but find some areas where you can emphasize, maybe in the corners of the mouth, and have other areas kind of fall away. Highlights in the eyes look good. They're nice and bright. While you do have this nice kind of gray, it feels a little isolated. I can kind of almost see this spot with this darker pink around it. And what I would suggest is just incorporating a little bit of pink in there to break it up. So you might take like this pink here and just lightly scumble and overlap. And same thing with this pink here. Just, you want the bluish gray influence, but you don't want it to look like a very distinct, spot. So pay attention to that as well. And this might be a little bit light in spots as well. So maybe take, I would take maybe a kind of a mauvey skin tone, but bring the value down and use that over that area instead and solidify that side plane of the muzzle. Make it a little darker, and that's going to help to get that to turn. And then you might take a slightly darker red and just kind of a burgundy. And go a little bit darker where it starts to pull into that corner of the mouth. paying attention to where those edges soften. Your shadows look dark enough. It's a little hard to tell right over here, but it seems like you have decent edges there. Like I said, it's much easier to create soft edges when you're working on canvas, but you do want to watch like this little spot, and it's really easy to kind of correct these. If they ever jump out to you later, you can just take a little bit of the other skin tone that's adjacent to it and just kind of lightly scumble over it and break it up, and still let that green play a role, but it's kind of sitting underneath, or it's a little more broken up into the different values. And then maybe under the lip here, go a little bit warmer with this little shadow. She does have a greenish kind of halo around that, but maybe emphasize that warmth there, and then touch as it transitions over. Maybe even just a slight glaze to help turn that side plane of the jaw. Okay, so that looks really nice. If you have any follow-up questions, just reach out to me by email or through the forum. And then I just wanted to look at this. I realize the colors are a little matte because everything's probably sunk in. But I just wanted to talk about the background and the shirt kind of moving forward. I would suggest going maybe just go over your background with another pass to even things out and try to build maybe a little more. If you're going to go with the purple, just a little bit more dark on the left side, and you can get a little bit lighter and kind of more bluish purple on the right side. And if you do that, you might want to push this. I can't tell if it's just the photo, but just make sure that you have a nice dark silhouette on that side of the head, and then go darker with your shirt. On the back side of the shirt, it should be fairly dark to help silhouette the figure against the background. And of course, you'll need to detail the shirt and build that out. Doesn't look like you've been able to go in to that just yet. Details in the hair are starting to look good, but I think you could keep building some of that texture and some of that variety to the tones, and look for where you could bring the light maybe over to the edge of the background, and then have it get darker, and then have it get lighter, so that you have that nice lost and found edge along the hair. And just another suggestion is, if you're going to go with the purple background and not do any kind of sky like I did in my demo, make sure you do some kind of gradient leading down. That way the shirt edge kind of fades. You know, it might be silhouetted up here and it goes dark all the way down, but then your edge along the shirt in the background right here versus right here, it doesn't pull our eye down here because the values are more similar. Okay, really nice work. If you have follow-up questions because you weren't live, let me know. And thank you again for joining the class. Beautiful work. All right, everyone, I think that concluded our morning session. I know some of you are on vacation or you've been busy with shows and life. So if you guys continue working on your paintings, again, you can reach out to me by email or through the forum and get some written feedback from me as you continue to develop. And those of you who did get critiques today, implement some of these changes and please share with me. I'd like to see your finished work. And if you get a really good picture of your finished work, please send it to me. I'd love to use it as an example with your permission of student work on my website. Yeah, so anyone have any final questions? Thank you, Susan. I look forward to seeing your painting when you have a moment to work on it. I know you've had a lot going on with your show. So anyone can kind of pop in here now, even if you're not a critique student. You can message in the chat box to the right if you haven't done that yet, and just post a question. I'll stay on for another about 5 minutes and just answer some questions. I think I put, Marianne, are you in group B? I think I got your images. Let me double check real quick. Yes, I did. I got your images. So they're in the, you didn't send them in too late, so I got them just this morning. I realize everyone probably wanted to work as long as they could on their portraits, and I completely understand that. Even if you were working on it really late. Don't worry about it. I pulled plenty of all-nighters just to get work turned in for school, so I completely understand. Susan, so your question is, will you cover how to fix things if they go wrong varnishing? Yes, I will, because I've had that experience. I don't know if you remember, but I had posted in the Best Painting Practices Facebook page. I had varnished a commission, which is extra scary, and I had an issue with the matte or satin varnish. It went on beautifully, but it dried with streaks. Yeah, and the streaking is a really big issue, and I'm going to show you guys a trick to where that won't happen. I just started implementing this little tip, and it really helps. And if you like a more satin finish, that's probably what I'm going to talk about, is how to achieve that kind of nice professional finish to your portrait. But you know, sometimes, especially if you're working on canvas or you're working on a really textured panel, you don't want a really glossy varnish. A gloss varnish can look nice on certain subjects, but whenever you go too glossy, it can show every dust speck. It can show, you know, if you're working on a textured canvas, it kind of looks like glitter. You know, it's just too much reflection happening, and you lose depth that way. So I'm going to talk about how to get a nice kind of middle ground. And I don't actually even like the satin varnish by Gamvar as they sell it. So I actually mix mine together, and I'll talk about how to make your own satin without theirs, or how to just mix their satin with the gloss and get a finish that you like. And then also to avoid streaks, because that's a big issue. And you know, the same thing that, and another common complaint with Gamvar, which is the varnish I use, but is that it has a tendency to kind of bead up on the surface. And I've noticed just in general, it tends to do this with lead white especially, and I think it's because the lead white film of paint, once it dries, it can dry pretty slick, and it can, so you don't have that surface tension. But there's a few things you can do to reduce that from happening. So I'll talk about some of those tricks as well. Varnishing is it's an animal on its own. You know, it's its own beast that you kind of have to tackle and experiment with. And I recommend, if you've never varnished before or you want to experiment, just take some old paintings and do it on those first, or old studies or anything that you don't care about too much. Or you can even just do some quick little paintings, set those aside for the practice varnish, and that will kind of be a good thing for playing around with that. Yeah, it's the Gamvar has a tendency to bead up. It can do it on canvas and it can do it on panel. There's a few things that I find help to prevent that. And I'll talk about a few ways to approach it. If you're finding that it's beating up on you, I'll talk about, like, you can apply it with a lint-free rag first. Use a little bit of wax in the varnish, there's a few different things that you can do to help prevent it from beating up, and I'll talk a little bit about those things. Hi, Diane. Toning your new panel today, catching up. Yeah, well, there's no rush. Like I said, I'm going to keep the forum active until probably like the fall, and then it'll still stay active, but it's going to switch over to the new course, whichever that will be when I offer it. So you can access me and ask questions, Diane, through the forum. You can also email me, but if you have like questions on your painting, through the forum is also a good platform, and just let me know. All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for joining the class. And we will have another afternoon session if you guys want to pop in and watch that. That one starts at 2:30 Pacific Standard Time. All right, thank you guys. And I'll be in touch soon with the link for your lifetime access to the videos and downloads, and also with the varnish video. I should have that sometime mid-July is what I'm thinking. Okay? All right, thank you. Thanks again, guys. Enjoy your summer, and take care and keep painting. All right, bye-bye.